We're here at the Guinness.
Oh, you're
Brewery.
recording. Oh, I got it.
Oh yeah.
I got it.
We're here at the Guinness Brewery.
We didn't pay the money to go into the old library at the university, which is one of the oldest and most famous libraries in the entire world.
It's worth it for the brewery.
But I mean, like beer, right? So, like, what are you gonna do? For the record, I was outvoted.
We're going on a tour, and then afterwards we're gonna have to sample some Guinness. So we learned a couple interesting things while exploring the Guinness factory, and the first thing was that 100,000 tons of barley is used each year in making the Guinness beer. That's actually 2/3 of all the barley grown in Ireland on a yearly basis. The other interesting thing that we learned is how the yeast that's used in the Guinness beer is actually super important. Any yeast from one batch is carried over to the next batch in some quantity to help preserve flavor, and there's actually a supply that is locked up in the director's safe, just in case anything happens to the current yeast that they're using. It's time for beer tasting.
If you're on an audio
We got to try our hand at pouring the perfect Guinness pint, so Emily here is doing a fantastic job. So we finished our Guinness tour, and now we're up at the cool looking bar at the top of this building. You can see like all the Dublin from up here, and we're enjoying our Guinness.
Enjoying is a selective term for those of us that are not an alcoholic. What's the word you use?
I'm a beer enthusiast.
Beer enthusiast. Yeah.
So we're up here enjoying our Guinness beer, and we learned the Gaelic word for cheers, which was
Slainté.
So Slainté. So it's our last day in Ireland today, and we've gone on the Boyne Valley tour, which is Celtic history tour, and we're at our first stop right now, which is
Tara's Hill.
What is Tara's Hill?
Tara's Hill was a site of the coronation of kings in the ancient times of Ireland. Around us there's hills with ridges where they said they had celebrations and banquets and stuff for things like the equinoxes and solstices, that type of thing. It's also a site because there's hills and doorways that lead to places where they used to sacrifice bodies for the moon and the sun. It's said to be a site where the fairies could get from the underworld to our world. So there's a fairy tree in front of us. There's a hill behind us.
That's a fairy tree right there.
There's a fairy tree.
What you do is you tie a piece of fabric to the tree, and it symbolizes your wish to the fairies, and then maybe they'll grant it. Or maybe not, because they're fairies. But, you know, myths are cool.
Fairy people of Ireland live underneath Ireland. But they say that the only places that they can come into the overworld is through passages like this. Realistically, slightly different. What this is a passage. These have been standing here for nearly 5,000 years in most cases. Okay, this one is lined up to illuminate the back wall during the spring and autumn equinox.
So this is the actual hill of Tara, and the site altogether was where the High King of the Irish people would have been crowned and would have held celebrations and things like that. It's pretty cool because from the top of this hill you can see on a clear day 1/8 of the entire countryside of Ireland. Even without climbing to the top, it's a pretty crazy view.
This stone is known as the Stone of Destiny. Before a king was officially known as the king, he had to place his hands on the stone, and if the sky was said to scream, then he was considered a true High King of Ireland.
So this is an old Norman style castle built for monastery purposes back around 1000, which is a long time ago. It's in a fair bit of ruins, but we're still able to climb up and explore, which is pretty neat. So now we're at the Norman-style castle known as Trim Castle. That's the inner keep of the castle. This is actually where parts of Braveheart was filmed, which is pretty cool.
This is Low Crew. It's a climb at the top of a hill that just about killed me. It's an old pagan worship site. You can see that in the rocks here. There's markings that look like swirls and Celtic-y signs. That's from the pagans about 5,000 years ago. What they did was they would use these areas as a way to send the spirits of the dead along to the next world. With these bodies, they also left grave treasures, such as personal possessions, similar to the Egyptians. And you can see on the walls the markings they left behind. There's still pagans in Ireland, and pagan symbolism is still very prominent in Celtic culture.
Hello.
This is a monastery known as Monaster Boyce. The tower you see in the footage here is where the monk would have lived. The Celtic cross is an important example of the combination between the pagan religion and the Christian religion. The cross is obviously Christian, but you can see the pagan influences in a lot of the design and even the circle that goes around the cross area.
So that was Ireland, mostly Dublin, but we also did the surrounding countryside in that last tour that we did. Any overall impressions?
The people were great and the beer was great. So
Okay.
I would love to go back and check out more of the countryside especially. The bus tour really gave us kind of glimpses of different areas of just awesome greenness and it was just great to see more of the countryside and more of the parts of Ireland that you hear so much about and you get excited to go see.
It does fit the pretty stereotypical bill of Ireland or Irish countryside. What I liked about Dublin was that it seemed familiar, but at the same time not familiar at all.
Mm-hmm.
A few interesting things that I found. The waiter that we had one night on our last night of drinking, he said that apparently different accents happen on either side of the River Liffey, which is the canal that runs right through the middle of city centre Dublin. So I found that really interesting, as well as just the culture that it kind of surrounds it. It's not the typical culture that you would expect. There's not like Irish dancers everywhere, like clovers and leprechauns hanging from everywhere. Although I'll admit there was a leprechaun museum. We didn't go in, but we did see that.
I think a large part of it is because it's such a large city, you get such a multicultural big city vibe as opposed to going to these little towns where you get to experience that traditional old-fashioned culture.
Yeah, that was one thing I wasn't expecting was they're more... All right, thank you.
There's some cool stuff happening in the hostel right now. Let's just leave it at that.
Hostel life. But yeah, I just found it super interesting that it was like more multicultural than Canada even seemed to be. You have like walking down one of the main streets in the middle of Dublin, you have like Burmese food on one side. There's a lot of Italian food, a lot of French food, but you also have like Greek food and every kind of Southeast Asian and Asian food you can possibly think of. It's just...
Not to mention the mix of languages just walking down the street.
Mm-hmm. They also have schools of English everywhere, which I find interesting considering English is the spoken language in Dublin, but I assume it's because there's so many immigrants and people that come from all over the world that they have those language schools open for them. That's another thing I found interesting, though, was that they don't use Gaelic, or I guess that's an umbrella term. They don't use Irish as their spoken language, but they do learn it in school, and every single sign you see has Irish first and then English second because it's the official language of Ireland.
Yeah, they learn Irish, which is, like Emily said, a subset of Gaelic, all through school up till grade 12. So while it's not fluent as far as speaking goes, most Irish people can at least read it and write it, and they understand the basic meaning behind it.
So kind of like French immersion, right?
But overall, I really enjoyed Dublin and Ireland, and we get to go back and see Southern Ireland and Cork a little bit later in our trip, which I'm excited about.
Mm-hmm. Overall, I loved Ireland. I loved Dublin. Very interesting culture to be surrounded in. I would 100% go back. I guess we are going back right at the end. We're flying home from Dublin, so I guess I can relive the memories once again. But yeah, so...
now we're off to Scotland, so that'll be our next video.